Perfect. I think we're all there. Thank you very much for coming, everybody. I know we are close to the happy hour networking, so your time is appreciated. You do have other places to be. My name is John Kennedy. I work at Aiven. I'm the head of databases, and I'll introduce the person I'll be speaking to today.
Yeah, hi. I'm Andre. I'm a staff engineer at Kroo Bank. I'm at Kroo Bank for 2.5 years. I worked in different teams in product, and also I work closely with the cloud team, which is our platform team, doing a lot of Kafka, event-driven designs, and helping the teams to improve the quality of our data platform in our microservices. So yeah, that's briefly.
Brilliant, thank you, Andre. And so what we're here to talk about today with Andre about Kroo Bank is their journey on their modern architecture, how they got there and how they evolved. So we're going to be going through that in a question and answer format. There probably won't be time for direct questions from the audience at the end, but we will stand up and be here and available for you to come and talk to us, so please do that at the end. It'd be great to have a chat to you, find out what resonated, find out what challenges you're facing. So let's get started. So the first one, I think anyone who came to the event on the tube saw the flashes on the back of mobile phone cases showing all the different challenger banks that are out there at the moment. It's a really crowded space. There's an awful lot going on, and staying competitive in that must have been tough. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you've grown rapidly in that competitive market, and what were the key challenges that triggered you to modernize your data stack?
Yeah, definitely. So luckily for us, I would say almost from the beginning, the architecture of the Kroo Bank was designed with future scaling in mind. So we started with microservices. Some of them are stateless, most of them has state, and in most microservices we use Postgres as a database. Inside the database we usually use event sourcing pattern, and after that naturally we have Kafka as our mechanism to distribute messages, so we have asynchronous communications through Kafka. So that was all in place long before I joined. I checked yesterday, our self-hosted Kafka cluster first commit is 7 years ago. So since that time, we pretty have that same architecture. We just evolved it. But what happened is when the bank received, secured the full banking license, right? We started getting more customers, more volume in terms of transactions and data, and we've seen the growth in our Kafka cluster as well. And actually, this self-hosted Kafka cluster never failed us, but we just thought, what will happen if we have like a major failure? And we just realized that there is not enough knowledge in the team about the maintenance and how we evolve it, right? So the logical question was what we're doing next, right? And one of the examples of what happened is that when we got more data coming in, our storage capacity was reaching like the limit. So we had to find a way to scale the disk sizes. And we had our self-hosted Kafka deployed in ECS, and we have EBS volumes attached. So we spent quite a lot of time trying to understand how to do that without downside. Hopefully we've done that. But after that, yeah, the question was, are we spending a lot of resources and dedicated people that look for the self-hosted Kafka, or we're looking for the managed solution? And that's how we ended up picking Aiven as a provider. And since that, it was just a matter of time moving our workload into the managed Kafka. So, yeah.
Brilliant. And that's the pattern we see quite a lot, is people trying to offload the management of on-prem or self-managed technologies into the cloud so that they can focus their development time on the things that bring their customers money. Infrastructure shouldn't be most of your time for your expensive resources, so that makes perfect sense. We've got another question here about your move towards an asynchronous architecture from a synchronous one. Can you give a little bit of an education to those of us who aren't so familiar? What's the difference between the two, and what benefits do you see from adopting that asynchronous?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, the Kafka was in place for like 7 years, and I checked with some team members, and actually there was a first attempt to do the microservices where they're synchronous and blocking requests, but it was so long time ago, so I cannot share much details on that. So since that, we have this asynchronous infrastructure, and obvious benefit was when we had more traffic, right? We now able to scale different parts of the system independently, and even if we scale some part of the system, right, we not generating too much stress on the rest of the system. Like the worst can happen is that we build some queues somewhere, but we can scale other parts as well. So this was obvious benefit of this initial architecture, microservices and Kafka and asynchronous events. One of the challenges that we had is that originally we had a GDBC connector that listens to the database, and that's how data was coming into Kafka, right?
Yep.
But when we got load, we started seeing a problem that we started missing some events. And that's due to the nature of the GDBC connector, like concurrent transactions, and you have this problem. You need to configure your connector somehow, so it was a bit of a nightmare. And yeah, so the change was as we adopted Debezium CDC, and it worked really well for us. So it's like a different mechanism when you don't use queries to get your new data. You just rely on like a write-ahead log in your database to get the updates. So it was really reliable, and now we have all the connectors using Debezium, and it worked really well.
Brilliant. And CDC, change data capture, for those who maybe aren't familiar with some of the terminologies, that allows you to have a more rapid and automated response to change in the database so you can take action. So just really, and in terms of that, in terms of the flexibility of scaling, what's the value? Like we hear from some customers that it allows them just to respond to unexpected. Like we mentioned, we don't always know when our customers are going to spike, but we know that within an hour or two we can expand things up. Is that the kind of agility that you were able to adopt when things got busy?
Yeah. Or we can, like for example, in particular times of the day we have these spikes. For example, some third-party providers tends to send us a bunch of data in particular times, so we can adjust our scaling policies in the part of the system that handles events from that provider, and it will scale up, scale down. So yeah, that's kind of
brilliant. And that's cost effective as well, right? You're not having large amounts of infrastructure sat around either doing nothing or bursting at the seams and needing more.
Yeah.
Perfect. I think it's clear from the discussion so far that Kafka forms a fairly fundamental, if not backbone, piece of your offering and the value you offer to your customers. How do you, we've talked a little bit about scaling, but how do you, as a team, go about optimizing Kafka in its managed kind of state for performance and data observability? Because some might worry that once you give away the keys to the management that you lose some level of control or the ability to tune and adapt.
Yeah.
And like, what's the reality for your usage and adoption?
I believe there won't be any magic tricks I can share, and maybe that's a good thing, because we're basically using almost the defaults that we have from the Kafka cluster, and maybe it's our use case, maybe we're not too big for some like fine-tuning. The thing that really worked for us is enabling the compression, and specifically the ZSTD compression in Kafka, so it was a pretty decent balance and a trade-off. Like we have a lot of savings in terms of storage, and we haven't noticed too much CPU impact in both producers and consumers. And as I said, like we have this pretty standard architecture when we have database and then we have Kafka connector. And like 90% of our data that comes to Kafka is through the Kafka connector. So when we enable the compression on the consumer, it was kind of like a global setting that enabled the compression in almost every data like every topic that we have. We have a bit of Kafka stream, we enabled it there, and after that we have like 100% compression enabled. So yeah, that's about the Kafka optimizations that we've done. So
brilliant. And just to kind of highlight, we've been running Kafka as a service at Aiven since before some of the more larger companies who are based on Kafka. So we have an inbuilt knowledge around how things work, how they should work. The defaults are not just defaults out of the box. We've generally tuned it to know how to manage it. So that's one of the advantages of coming to someone who's an expert, is that you don't have to know any of that stuff. We've kind of built it in out the box so you can just get going. So it's really good to hear that that's also reducing your kind of internal toil about
managing
these things and worrying about it and trying to tune it.
Yeah, and in most cases you don't have to be an expert and understand like this. Like if you count the number of settings you have in Kafka, it's like more than like 300 different config options, and it's really tricky to understand what are they doing exactly. So it's pretty cool that you can just rely on defaults and it will work good enough.
People run into sleep at night because they know their Kafka's not going to blow up. That's great. I guess the other thing to say is anyone who's been in technical support for any length of time knows there are some configs and settings you just shouldn't mess around with. So we make sure those are locked down as well. So that one, sorry, old school paper. I just really thought I wanted to have paper for this thing. So apologies for that. So one of the topics we see coming up in a lot of our customers and is increasingly becoming part of regulation in some industries is the need for multi-cloud. So not just being reliant on one vendor for your infrastructure, but having the capability or ability to be able to move your infrastructure to a different cloud should the need arise for whatever reason. How are you thinking about multi-cloud at Kroo? What's your strategy and any lessons you've learned?
Yeah. So we pretty much still on the way to the multi-cloud and all that stuff. We are mostly our main cloud now is AWS, and most of the workload is in AWS. And the setup is pretty simple as well. We have single region, multiple availability zones. Pretty standard, I believe, to startups and small companies. We started using Google Cloud for some workloads, like BigQuery. We use Vertex AI, I believe, for some products. So that's a step forward, right? And being a fintech and like a bank with a full license, it's like a really regulated environment. So we have to think about DR, not just because it's a right thing to do, right? It's just because we need to make sure that regulators are good with our approach. So our current thinking is what we're focusing on is be able to roll out our services to a different region at least. And then we have the strategy for the databases, so we have like a backups available in multiple regions, and then we can quickly spin up database replica in a different region. So regarding the Kafka, we are just starting that project, I would say. Our current thinking is to spin a separate cluster in different region, configure the replication with something like Mirror Maker. Yes, we're kind of like duplicating the costs, or maybe we can save a bit spinning smaller cluster, but we see that as an option for us to go, and hopefully we'll pick that work this year.
Brilliant. And I think that's a very familiar pattern of multi-cloud journey for our customers. And a lot of people are with one cloud. You have a big spend there, you have a large commit, you extend to stay. But we are seeing more people needing to move databases and streaming or be able to quickly fail over to a different cloud should they need to. The advantage of Aiven, not to get into a sales pitch, is the ability to clone or move a service from one region in the same cloud is exactly the same as to move it to a different cloud. Everything is persisted, there's no downtime, so you can move from Google to AWS to GCP pretty much with the click of a button. So we are seeing people replicating workloads, making sure they've got the ability to, and even if it doesn't persist as an ongoing infrastructure that they set up, just being able to test, to prove, to meet their requirements, to show the regulators that can happen is a really high value.
Yeah. And we're mostly using Kafka from Aiven, right? But you have also managed Postgres, and I heard that it's pretty impressive that you can replicate it quickly to different cloud, different region from the UI.
Yeah, and that capability is like it came out of the box. It was part of the system before we actually knew it was a value add to customers. So sometimes you stumble across these things. So it does work really well, but also the DR failover that you mentioned there, that's critical for Kafka. We're working with customers to make sure we can do that as well without you necessarily doing the Mirror Maker bit in the middle, so that it is more of an enterprise grade DR offering, and that's critical to our customers, so we're working hard on that. It's not easy because, as anyone knows, the point where you look at a database to decide where it's down or up, that you can look at it from many places, and triggering a failover when you don't need to is as bad as an outage, so it's tricky stuff. I know your company is quite keen on open source and the value it delivers. What for you? How much open source is in your technology stack, and how has the utilization of open source technologies helped with your cost efficiency and any other aspects of value for the business?
Yeah, open source is a critical part, right, of our tech stack. So Kafka Connect, first things, and being close to what open source, our self-hosted Kafka looked like, was one of the criteria how we picked the provider for the managed cluster. So we understood the requirements that we have, how many brokers we need, how many disks size, and the only thing we're looking for is just to remove this headache of the maintenance and version upgrades and all that stuff. And that's why I believe Aiven worked really well, because what we have out of the box is pretty standard and pretty close to the open source version of the Kafka, right? So one of the examples is we have I would say like 70 or 80 connectors, basically the number of services that has own database, and we need to publish events to Kafka, right? And it's a quite high number to deploy, number of connectors, but we know that the load is significantly not too high, right? So we can fit all those connectors in a pretty small Kafka Connect deployment. And the only thing that we need to monitor is like CPU memory usage. If it goes up, we can scale, but in terms of cost, it's really cost efficient because we can use like small cluster for both Kafka and Kafka Connect. So that's about this big things. And also we use a lot of open source in other areas. So related to Kafka is tools like Kafka UI, right? We tried a bunch of open source tools, like we're using Practice Kafka UI, for example, and some other things. We also willing to try the Claw tool that Aiven is now supports, which is like a data governance for Kafka. We haven't tried it yet, but really looking forward to that, because maybe we can manage our Kafka resources through this same UI. And probably maybe the biggest highlight from the previous year was the move on the consumer side. Instead of plain Kafka consumer, we're using a library from Confluent. Actually, it's like an open source library called Parallel Consumer, and we switched to this pattern, and it worked really well. So basically what the library is doing is, instead of using partitions as like a unit of parallelism in the processing, now you can process events inside the partition independently by the key. So for example, we have a topic where we have like orders, and all the events like for the orders, or some transactions, and then we select a key, maybe custom, maybe transaction ID or something like that, and when one event fails, we're not blocking the entire processing of that partition, right? We still process other events, only one key is blocked, and it worked really well in terms of scalability. We don't need to scale partitions up, because you cannot scale them down easily, and you don't even like need that, right? But you can have this extra layer of parallelization in your applications. And also, when we have a failed event, we now have more time for engineers to fix that, because it's not affecting the third of the traffic. It just affects one customer or even one transaction, something like that. So if you are in Java ecosystem and you're using Kafka consumers, I highly recommend to try and take a look in this library. Pretty cool.
And I think that's key as well, that in keeping the heart of the business open source, the compatibility with other libraries created elsewhere. When you've got a great community like Kafka or PG, you can gain access to technologies that can really accelerate your business, and you're not locked in any way, shape or form. So you're kind of enabled by that wider community of connection. One thing that's not on the sheet, so a bit of a side, curveball, we're launching tiered storage for Kafka, which is something we developed upstream in the community, and we shared, we worked with other communities and other companies to develop that. The goal being that you can offload to cheaper storage for larger queues. Is that of interest to you, and do you think that's something that you can leverage within the company?
Yeah, I think yes. So now we just went with restricting our retention policy to some quite low number. So we have 2 weeks or maybe a month in some topics, but definitely if we can increase that for some particular topics, right, and maybe store it like infinite retention policy, then we want to optimize the cost, right? And if we can utilize the cheaper storage for those type of things, that definitely will help. So yeah.
My peer Philip uses the term infinite Kafka quite a lot, so yeah, we're really excited about that one getting out there.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up, I think we've got about eight minutes left. What are the new kind of key trends or technologies that you think are going to take Kroo Bank to the next level, or what goes beyond what you're currently doing? What's the next evolution of your architecture and infrastructure?
Yeah, I would say things related to streaming and streaming applications. And unfortunately, we are a bit behind in that area. So we had Kafka for quite a long time, but it's mostly used for the asynchronous communication between microservices, right? So what we are looking forward is trying and adopting Flink, and ideally we want a managed version of that, because why not? And Aiven provides Flink as a managed service, so I believe that will be a next big step for us. And we also looking forward to open our data platform more to data team, data science teams, so they can build more stuff on that, like again, the real-time applications mostly. And we have a couple cases now when we use Vertex AI for some stuff. Like one example will be automatic alert closure. So it reduced the load on the operation team, because we handled a quite significant percentage of false positives with this model. But yeah, if we want to open our data to these teams, we need to make sure that the data is in the right shape, and quality of data is good. So now it's controlled by the microservices, so they like use it as a bus to communicate. So schemas and all that stuff should be in place for the next step for us.
And those internal teams, and you may not want to answer this, how mature do you think they are in terms of, how confident are you that if you let them at the data, that they'll be able to get value out of it? How much training and work do you think is going to need to go on to make sure? Because what I've seen from a lot of customers is that desire to make the most out of the data involves exposing it to more people, but actually the knowledge gap between them getting through a useful level of knowledge to be able to leverage that and just giving them access, there's a lot of work that goes into that space. What are you thinking about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, at least we need to have Flink in place. So at least that will be a place where they can, without writing custom code and custom application, they can try and build some applications with a Flink API, right? Until that, we're kind of like in the Wild West situation. Yeah. Now we already have integration with the data team and data science team, but in more controlled ways. So we expose bits of data that they need, and we are not opening the entire Kafka cluster for them.
Yeah. So. And I guess it's that balance of the amount of effort it takes to curate that for them, and then how much you're going to invest to make it self-serve, and where that balance comes and at what time. So yeah, I think that's a challenge a lot of companies facing, exposing the data to the wider company. So yeah. Andre, we are pretty much at time. So thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. I hope that was interesting to the audience. If we ran through any terms or any details that you'd like to talk about, or you want to talk about Kafka in general and how it works, then please come up and see us. We'll stand up now and wait at the front. Aiven is just 2 booths down if you want to come and have a chat more usefully with any of us. I've got a lot of folks working over there, so thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show.
Thanks a lot.